of truth-telling tongues, the dream-footed dances of children, the patience of people harnessed to a forward rhythm. Praise the tapping heartbeats to know the sound of chest-to-chest lovemaking, leaders who know how to grieve and gather the pulse of truths. For the cartographers of courage, the map makers of memories, myths, and magic, the lush promise of roads less traveled, the smell of the earth's breath just after rain, to revere listening to nature, to neighbor the stars, the language of constellations, we who belong to the impossible, whose lives moonlight in the margins of closed-shut door meetings, we who mock the circus of politicians, drunkard drones who judge the advent of crimes and not the mallet of laws, the felony of fictions. The gifts of being is how we make and unmake, the arms of togethering, the literacy of laughter, a sense of humor. How preposterous the concept of poverty. In a world of wealth, the weapons of war blushing at a future awaiting us, embarrassed to have ever been anything once lived and discussed, to the abolition of police and prisons, of borders and bombs, to the abolition of greed, to the intoxicating aroma of gardens and public parks, farmers tilling fertile soil, the faint memory of machines. Here's to the hands, the hardworking hands, the hands of healers hung over the minds who lack imagination. An end to indifference. Freedom isn't sorry, doesn't wear a suit and tie. Freedom has no regrets, turns us all into fools. The buffoonery of self-importance. The ocean giggles at the careerism of human rights. The sky grins, the land chuckles. The what if of our tomorrows awaits the decisions of our todays. Here's to the awe of our solidarity. Be courageous, be patient, be honest. In the year beyond the year, under a new waking day, shedding the tears like skin, we were there. We, tell it like it is, we were there, clinging to our elders' dreams, praying for the inconvenient courage to nourish and nurture unfleshed truths, to suck the meat of the bones of words, to be honest, to be courageous, to be truth. Feed on the love of those who shouldered singing scars, who came before you. Choose this life, ready to endure this bronze-blemished body. Listen for a calling. Be a calling. Be purposeful. Be a miracle taken for granted, the cosmic door between earth and spirit. Be your own beat to your own drum. Be rhythm. Have some rhythm. Dance on beat. Two-step on beat. Be rhythm. Be church palms or unmapped love, leaning on the unseen world. There is who we were before we knew ourselves, and there is the knowing. Know something. Know better. The spirit of discernment. Know better. Do better, because you know better. This truth, this medicine, this meaning, this medicine, this making of a new possibility, this nowhere, this search for ourselves to be who we really are, a poem as a crown, a purging of what was so that we can be. Praise the day that we become who we are. To lead is to listen, to lead is to listen is to lead. Be a listener of heart.
Wow, thank you, Aja. Compelling, powerful words of fusion of art and advocacy. Thank you for that thought-provoking start to our morning. And now it is time to hear from Mary Robinson. She's going to tell us all about the Elders' urgent mission. Mary is former President of Ireland and UN High Commissioner for Human Rights and the Chair of the Elders.
Well, poets always say it better. Thank you, Aja. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, first of all, distinguished guests, my colleagues from the Elders, young leaders and global citizens from around the world. It really is an honor to welcome you to this critical intergenerational dialogue on existential threats. For the Elders, your presence here today underscores the urgency of our mission and the need we have to hear other voices on this mission, to learn. As Aja rightly said, to lead is to listen, and I'm going to repeat that. For elders, Mandela told us to be humble and to listen. And why we're here today is to hear different voices and perspectives on the existential threats that we are working on. Together, we have spent several decades in either global leadership or addressing some of these most pressing issues of our time. However, we also recognize that the challenges we face today demand more than experience alone. They call for fresh perspectives, innovation, and the energy of youth. As we gather here in New York, just days before the UN Summit of the Future, we found ourselves confronted with a question: are we ready to lead together? The path to the Summit of the Future has been fraught, as you know, and full of obstacles. Ambitions have been watered down, and realpolitik and national self-interest have trumped the greater good. As Aja put it, we are at the heart of weathering. And precisely why we need to make a success of this meeting is we need the ideas, we need the innovation, and we need to hold on to what is there in the Pact for the Future, particularly the Declaration on Future Generations. And gatherings like this today can play an important role in generating and catalyzing future progress. Because we do stand at an historic crossroads. We'll hear the science in a few moments. Make no mistake about it, the world is in a perilous place, and therefore we need the positive narrative of how we move forward together. Decisions taken today will shape the future of our planet for generations to come. And this is why long-view leadership is essential. Essential for the survival of humanity and the prosperity of our world. We have knowledge, resources, tools to confront existential threats. What we lack is the political will and the long-term vision needed to take bold and decisive action. And that's why we're gathered here today, to bridge the gap between generations, to bring together the wisdom of experience with the energy and innovation of youth, and increase pressure on political leaders. So our challenge is to listen to the voices of the younger generation. They're not simply leaders of tomorrow, they are the catalysts for change today. Youth around the world are calling for action. For example, 92% of young Africans are demanding greater climate education. Youth perspectives on nuclear disarmament, climate action, and global security are not just valuable, they are indispensable. And to the future leaders, activists, and visionaries in the room and listening, your passion and your creativity are the lifeblood of this dialogue. You're inheriting a world of immense challenges, but you're also inheriting the power to shape incredible possibilities. We need your bold ideas, your innovative solutions, and your unwavering commitment to building a better future. To philanthropists, experts, and journalists, your role is critical. You amplify these voices, you support vital initiatives, and you ensure that accurate information reaches those who need it. You're the link between ideas and action, between knowledge and implementation. Together, we must embrace what we call long-view leadership. And what does this mean? This means looking beyond the short-term political cycles to deliver solutions that benefit both present and future generations. Understanding that lasting solutions, particularly in areas of arms control and climate action, require global collaboration and sometimes a difficult compromise. Designing policies that not only address current needs, but also protect the dignity and rights of those most vulnerable to the impacts of these existential threats. Upholding the international rule of law with transparency, accountability, and a commitment to justice. Committing to a vision of hope and unity rather than allowing ourselves to be divided by past or current grievances. The data from our global polling is clear. The world wants action, and the world is looking to us for leadership. 75% of global respondents calling for a UN loss and damage fund to help communities impacted by climate change. 69% calling for nuclear disarmament. 65% supporting stronger international governance on artificial intelligence. Consistent message: people want our leadership, and they want that leadership now. And that's why we're here today, to ensure that our collective response to these existential threats reflects the best of what every generation has to offer. Are we ready to lead together? I actually believe, looking round, I believe we are. I believe we take strength from each other. We grow our power together. We have that sense that we are going to try to make a difference as much as we can. So thank you very much for being here, and I so look forward to our transformative conversation. And now I have the great pleasure of introducing our keynote speaker, Max Tegmark. He's a physicist who turned to AI and existential threats some years ago, and he's become an expert on these. And he will articulate global threats and future challenges from a science-based perspective. Basically, Max wants to be known as a nerd. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. It's a really great honor and pleasure to be here. I stand before you as a nerd and as a scientist and tell you that I very strongly support, can we get my slides up here? These 4 core goals articulated by the elders, and I'm particularly going to focus on 2 of them in my brief remarks: reducing nuclear war risks and ensuring that AI is a force for good. Reducing the risk of nuclear war is very dear to my heart as a physicist, and the core message I have is that we need to remind all of those hawks who are currently escalating and pushing us closer to the brink of the very basic scientific fact that a nuclear war cannot be won. We made this film precisely to show that.
When one side launches nuclear missiles, the other side detects them and fires back before impact. U.S. submarine-launched ballistic missiles from west of Norway start striking Russia after about 10 minutes. And Russian ones from north of Canada start hitting the U.S. a few minutes later. The very first strikes are high-altitude EMP attacks, frying electronics and power grids by creating an electromagnetic pulse of tens of thousands of volts per meter. The next strikes target command and control, as well as nuclear launch facilities. Land-based intercontinental ballistic missiles take about half an hour to arrive.
This picture, to me, is the picture of insanity. And here's why.
But the explosions, the electromagnetic pulse, and the radioactivity aren't the worst part. Nuclear winter is, caused by the black carbon smoke from the nuclear firestorms. The Hiroshima atomic bomb caused such a firestorm, but today's hydrogen bombs are much more powerful. A large city like Moscow, with almost 50 times more people, can create much more smoke. And a firestorm sends plumes of black smoke up into the stratosphere, far above any rain clouds that would otherwise wash out the smoke. This black smoke gets heated by sunlight, lofting it like a hot air balloon for up to a decade. High-altitude jet streams are so fast that it takes only a few days for the smoke to spread across much of the northern hemisphere. In the meantime, Earth gets freezing cold, even during the summer, with farmland in Kansas cooling by about 20 degrees centigrade, or 40 degrees Fahrenheit, and other regions cooling almost twice as much. A recent scientific paper estimates that over 5 billion people could starve to death, including around 99% of those in the United States, Europe, Russia, and China. We obviously don't know how many people will survive a nuclear war, But if it's even remotely as bad as scientists think, then it has no winners, merely losers.
Let's de-escalate. Now, how do we ensure that artificial intelligence is a force for good? What is artificial intelligence? It's simply non-biological intelligence. What's intelligence? Well, in practice, what really matters is its ability to accomplish goals. They can be goals like creating a beautiful poem, like persuading people, like answering questions, like making a lot of money. And they can be very noble goals, like the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. There are so many great things we can do with AI. But they can also be less noble goals, like creating an Orwellian surveillance, manipulation. Can be very dubious goals like making deepfakes of elders.
I totally agree with Max Tegmark about every single thing related to AI. We might get superintelligence soon, and it's definitely an existential risk.
So this is why we've launched an international campaign to ban the bad kind of deepfakes. Now, the official goal of many of the leading AI companies is to make AI that's vastly smarter than humans in all ways. And in other words, not only make a new technology like electricity or the internet, but basically build a new species, a new robot species that's more capable, that's in all possible ways, which is something we could obviously, if we're sloppy, lose control over and get replaced by. And this is why so many leading AI researchers and even AI CEOs have come out and warned of the risk that this could even cause human extinction. Now, the really spectacular thing that's happened in the last few years is that the timelines to this have collapsed. It's spectacular how fast AI progress is. This is the state of the art of robot locomotion from 8 years ago. This one is particularly embarrassing coming up here because I think that's the MIT robot. And look how fast things are improving. This is from Midjourney. 1 year later, the exact same prompt gives this. The rate of progress in AI is just mind-blowing. And large language models like ChatGPT, of course, now are so good at mastering language and knowledge that our AI godfather, Yoshua Bengio, has argued that they already passed the Turing test and can fool a lot of people into thinking that they're human. So what this has done is cause a dramatic shift in the views, the forecasts of experts who work on AI. So 8 years ago, since eight years ago, I've been doing AI research at MIT, and most of my colleagues, even 5 years ago, thought that something as powerful as ChatGPT was decades away. And it's already happened. As recently as 3 years ago, most people thought, on this betting market here, that artificial general intelligence that can outsmart us at everything was decades away. And kaboom! In the timescale, in a very brief timescale, the predictions dropped to now to 2 years away. And leading AI CEOs are even saying things like this. So we have to stop saying that the threat of really major problems from AI, like massive manipulation, loss of control, and so on, is a long-term issue. Because I don't think something that might happen in 2 years deserves to be called a long-term issue. Basically, we thought we had decades to figure out how to make AI a force for good. My guess is that we have about 2 years. I'm a very humble person, so it might take longer, but it might also take just a little bit less than that. And in summary, this means that I agree strongly with what we heard from Mary Robinson here, that the call from the elders is an urgent call. Decades from now doesn't sound very urgent, If we have 2 years, it's urgent. So let's get it done. Thank you.
Millions of lives were lost to COVID-19, and millions more still struggle to overcome its devastating impact. And yet, the short-term thinking of our leaders leaves us woefully underprepared for the next pandemic. We know the solutions exist. What is lacking is the political will. It's time for long-view leadership. Will our leaders rise to the challenge?
My name is Raj Punjabi, and I'm a professor at Harvard Medical School. Pandemics are an existential threat. Just because we've lived through the worst pandemic in 100 years doesn't mean it's going to take another 100 years for another pandemic. We can't wait for that moment. We've got to act now. First and foremost, we need political leadership. We need to elevate the work of pandemic preparedness and response to the level of the offices of presidents and prime ministers. The second thing we need to do is we need to mobilize a lot more support. Multiple years of investment at the level of billions of dollars can save millions of lives, and it can help save trillions of dollars of economic loss from future pandemics. Some of the key lessons we've learned from fighting COVID-19, we've got to make vaccines more quickly. We need to detect outbreaks more rapidly, and we need to be able to stand up clinical trials more rapidly. We should be able to do all of that in 100 days or less. And the good news is if we take those actions, if we mobilize the money, the policies, and the actions now, we can together keep each of our own countries safer and the world much safer as well.
Future pandemics are inevitable. We need a multilateral system that is sustainably financed, inclusive, transparent, and equitably governed, so that our leaders can ensure the world is prepared. It's time for bold new thinking.
We're going to focus on the global response to pandemics in just a moment. First, thank you, Max, for spelling out for us in no uncertain terms from your perspective as a scientist the threats we face. We must change course now. Let's expand the conversation, bridge generations, and focus on solutions, the way forward. To talk about pandemics and the climate and nature crisis, please welcome to the stage now Elder Helen Clark, former Prime Minister of New Zealand and pandemic preparedness advocate. She'll chair a discussion with fellow Elder President Juan Manuel Santos, the former President of Colombia and Nobel Peace Prize laureate. Also joining them, Brazilian human rights lawyer and climate advocate Flavia Belaguarda. Please come on up, everyone. And global health and development expert Fatou Wuri. You will get a chance to ask our expert panel some questions a little later. You can also send your questions for the elders and our other speakers via our interactive Slido tool. You'll see a QR code in front of some of the seats, and you can use that QR code to send your questions. We also have a survey for you there. Helen, it is now over to you.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for coming to participate in this event organised by the Elders with Friends. And what a wonderful panel I have to kick off the dialogue around the existential threats which are requiring the long view leadership which Mary Robinson spoke about. So we've got a heady mix of topics identified as the sort of headline existential threats across pandemic and climate, which we'll delve into in this session, followed by nuclear weapons and then artificial intelligence. I must say, by way of introduction, listening to Max, I thought, in a way, how little the problems change with respect to nuclear weapons. Max presented a completely terrifying video, and it reminded me of the growth of the nuclear-free movement in New Zealand going back to the 1970s and 80s, which was not initially led by government at all. It came from the community. And around our country, people were so terrified by the Cold War that had developed between the Soviet Union and the United States, that at the community level, people formed their neighbourhood nuclear-free groups. This was a movement right through the South Pacific, and New Zealand, in a sense, said, if that's the future, we want to get off. And we eventually were thrown out of a military alliance with the United States because we said we didn't want to be defended by nuclear weapons. Still don't, by the way, because you can't be, as Max set out. And of course, we're now in a new era of contestation around that, not only with the threats being made in the context of Russia's illegal war on Ukraine, but also now with the contestation in the Asia-Pacific, which I refuse to frame as the Indo-Pacific, because that has a particular meaning. And we now have a concerted effort by some Anglophone powers to increase the number and range of nuclear submarines roaming around the South Pacific. I might say the countries of the South Pacific haven't asked for this defence. So, all these memories came back to me, Max, when I looked at you talking about the state of things at the moment. We've been there before. We got to better times. Things have slid away again. But we have to, present new visions for a future other than that. Just one other point perhaps to put on the table at the beginning. When friends and other organisations saw I was chairing this panel today, they were terribly keen that I should note that there's a global solidarity report which reports survey findings from people aged around 16 to early 70s on whether they have a strong sense of global citizenship. And apparently we baby boomers identified with a strong sense of global citizenship at about 32%. It increased for Generation X, must be those after us, to 35%. And then the millennials kind of peaked with at 37%. And they say Gen Z, it's now back down to something like 32. So they're saying there's a lot of work to do to ensure that young people continue to have a sense of global citizenship and mobilising around the shared threats that we face as a global community. We cannot take this for granted in the world we live in today. So, coming to this panel, and what a wonderful panel, my colleague, President Juan Manuel Santos, Nobel Prize winner, amazing advocate for the environment and on climate. His country is hosting the Biodiversity COP in Cali very soon, which we wish all the best for. To my right, I have Flavia Belaguarda from Brazil, which hosts the Climate Change COP next year, which we'd also like to see good movement on, bearing in mind that the two COPs before yours will have been run by petrodollar states, which doesn't make for the best of negotiating ambience, in my opinion. And Fatu, we've started talking outside about Fatu's experience in Sierra Leone when Ebola hit, the pandemic, a pandemic before the one we experienced from 2020 on. So lots to talk about. So to get everybody going, we're going to start with a kind of round-robin question, which enables you, I think, to frame the things you'd like to elaborate on for the remainder of the session. And it is to talk a little bit about the challenges and experiences of those on the front line of the climate and nature crisis and of pandemics that require urgent leadership. So I'm going to start with you, Flavia. Go for it.
So thank you for being here. It was nice to be here with you guys in the panel. Yeah, everyone is looking at Brazil right now. COP30 is just in the corner, and we do have a lot to do. Unfortunately, we are not facing the best picture right now in Brazil. We have been facing the consequences of climate change, and it's hitting hard our country. Just in the last months, for example, since the end of last year, we got, for example, Rio Grande do Sul, a state in the south of Brazil that was like vanished, and also more than 60% of the territory. We are facing the biggest dry in the Amazon River, and more than 300 communities is isolated right now. We are facing more than 60% of our territory. It's literally on fire, and due to like some criminal actions also, but because things are getting even drier and the biomes is getting drier, the fire is out of control. So like there's a lot happening there, and at the same time that we are planning ourselves to host the entire world for COP30. But on the other hand, we do have a bustling civil society, as you were saying about the youth being engaged. I think as Brazilian civil society, the youth in Brazil, they are really engaged. Like, of course, I'm not talking for everyone, but have been seeing like movements popping up all the time, every day in different parts of Brazil. And also we are heading to an important moment in Brazil, that is the municipal election. We have more than 5,000 municipalities in Brazil. So we are voting for new mayors, for new city councilors, and we are not seeing still the climate change on the top of the agenda. And it's something that it's hard to face, but we are doing whatever you can just to move forward with the climate agenda on the politics debates. And let's see what's going to happen after 6th of October, 9th of October. That is the election, is just in the corner as well. And hopefully we're going to have more politicians bringing the climate agenda on the top. And if you have more than 5,000 municipalities, can you imagine if at least half of them understand the importance of delivering climate agenda in a domestic level, and as civil society, as La Clima, and of course, we are not alone there. There's a lot of people trying to advocate for that with the climate election movement going on the ground as well.
Well, thank you for coming straight in on the environmental crisis for Brazil. And the Amazon is part of the global commons, not just a forest for the local countries. Its function for the world ecosystem is just so critical. And I think this will be an informed audience, which will be very concerned about whether scientists are right in picking that the Amazon has reached a tipping point where it will not recreate its unique ecosystem. And once you start to dry out and go to the savanna lands, you lose just so much in terms of habitat and species. And I've also been noting the pressure the Pantanal area is under at the moment as well. But Fatu, you also come from a forested country, with very important for the world's lungs as well. And I know you think cross-sectorally across climate, forests, pandemics, health. How would you like to respond to our opening round robin question?
Thank you. If you had told me 10 years ago to this day that I'd be sitting here talking about and leaning into the lessons that we learned during the Ebola outbreak in Sierra Leone, I couldn't see it. It's a decade to the day when the world closed its borders to us. It's about a decade to the day when we also experienced torrential floods, and I would see women walking down the streets of Freetown saying that the water took their babies. those were the times we're living in. It was a time where we were talking and thinking about the responsibility of multilateralism. It was a time that I also want to talk about the power of community and the power of young people. And so, Aja, your incantation, your poetry resonates within. We were there, we were there, we were really there. And so, with the Ebola experience, it was very clear to us that the delay in acknowledging that we had an outbreak was really because of the complicated, I think, failure of our multilateral system and how important it is. The political will is within our biggest systems, but also at our national systems. We were scared. We're still trying to shake the image of being a war-torn country so that the world could see us as more than that. And we then had to admit that we didn't have the mechanisms and the surveillance systems to be able to manage something that could potentially destroy lives. And in that moment, we were losing our institutions. For a country at that time, 7 million people, we were losing our few doctors. Dr. Khan, for example, these were institutions, so many were lost. And so when we finally said that, yes, we have a problem and we have to stop transmission and people have to stop touching their loved ones when they were sick, and yes, we had to wash our hands, and yes, we had to report to hospitals, the fear and the fear was rife throughout. And so you'd see all across Freetown, all across the country, Ebola is real. And so the opportunity there, when we think about epidemics and we think about pandemics and we think about the responsibility and the power of mobilization, yes, mobilization is incredibly important, how we mobilize resources, political will, but also the accountability to the people that we serve is incredibly important. The other thing, when we're thinking about the intersection of responding to outbreaks, building the appropriate surveillance and response systems, is all the intersecting factors that are happening simultaneously. And that's where you see the rise of communities. In the south of our country that was badly affected, while the rest of the world was running around shutting borders, talking about whether this was an outbreak or not, you had community members who began to have localized surveillance systems. They locked the entire part of that country. They watched who came in and they watched who came out. They didn't wait for leaders. The leadership was locally enacted. We had young people who would carry water from house to house. Young people taking sick people to hospitals as supplies would fly into the southeast part of our country. And so there is that in the long leadership and in the bold envisioning, that local power that I think really absolutely matters beyond the macro mechanisms that also influence how quickly we respond. I want to quickly speak to the part that a lot of people, I think, when we're thinking about the climate crisis, weren't aware of. Towards the end of the end, does it really end? As we were beginning to see more, I think, flow of support and resources, we had torrential floods that displaced 2,000 people in our capital city. 2,000 people sleeping in a stadium while we also had a deadly disease. And so the question for us was not just trying to stop transmission and stop and get, and really get people into Ebola treatment centers. It was, how do we also begin to think about our day-to-day ways of living, the deforestation that's happening as we're speaking about this, the illegal mining that's happening, the poor housing infrastructure. And that was when we also saw, I think, young people really mobilize in that stadium every single day. And we're a part of that. Some of them are in the audience today. And so even though we had development partners provide supplies, we also had our communities, going to the stadium every single day, trying to make sure people had healthy food. We were volunteering our time, and we were also trying to ensure that we were able to really keep women and children safe. So this is what brings me to this, and I really have to go back to Aja as we're sitting here. All of this conversation, and I hope I'm bringing all these stories here because sometimes we forget the humanity and the lives that are the center of these threats.
Thank you so much, and I want to come back to that issue of leadership after giving Juan Manuel Santos an opening statement as well. But Juan Manuel Flavia made the comment, which is so true, that for climate change, it's so often not at the top of leaders' agendas. They're dealing with very immediate things that they see. Cost of living pressures probably pretty much top of mind at the moment. So how in this context do we elevate these long-term existential threats needing the wise leadership at all levels to the top of the agenda?
Well, thank you. Thank you, Ellen, and thank you all for this opportunity. And let me tell you a small anecdote to try to illustrate what we need. Hearing Max and the picture he gave us about the consequences of a nuclear war. At the beginning of last year, I was with our chair, Mary Robinson, and we went to see the Russian ambassador in Washington. We were talking about the war in Ukraine, but we also mentioned, is there any possibility of Russia engaging again with the United States in order to negotiate a nuclear agreement? Is there any chance of that happening? And his response was vehement, no. And he hit the table and he said, until the US understands and acts that we are not willing to support anymore the model that the US imposed on the world after World War II, we will not talk about this issue. That was quite a statement, but that leads me to what the elders are asking for right now on long-term and bold leadership. If that is the case, and we want to avoid what we just saw, would it not be sensible to have the courage to sit down and use a phrase that Nelson Mandela mentioned many times, our founder, when he said the most powerful weapon there is to sit down and talk. And talk, and now I go to our first speaker, talk and listen, because leading is listening. Listen to Russia's concerns. Listen to why Russia invaded Ukraine. Not simply put a stop on what is happening, but try to understand. And that's the way to find solutions. But you have to have the courage to sit down. It's not, as many people think, a demonstration of weakness. On the contrary, it's a demonstration of strength. And with climate change, it's the same. Leaders around the world are thinking that, well, climate change will come afterwards, and I have to be re-elected, or I have to win the elections next year. Therefore, I'm not going to take the decisions that are necessary. I'll leave it to the next government. And that is what has brought us to the present situation. Even in Brazil, my dear Flavia, I have a great appreciation, and he's my friend, President Lula. And he wants to be the leader of the fight against climate change. And he wants COP30 to be successful, and we all want COP30 to be successful. But at the same time, he is promoting Brazil to be a power in the production of oil. How can you make that compatible? The leaderships, the good leaderships are the ones that are willing to make sacrifices and take unpopular decisions in order to have a long-term benefit. Because if you try to combine both, you will do nothing. And that is what's happening on many, many countries around the world. They say, in my country, my president wants to be also a champion of the environment. But you go down and see what is happening, and it's the contrary. So that's why I think that type of bold long-term leadership is so necessary. And how do you stimulate that? The young people. Pressure. Leaders understand pressure. Leaders react to pressure. And unless you enhance that pressure, they will not take the decisions that are needed. So I stop with that.
Well, I think, Juan Manuel, you're right to call out this talking out of both sides of the mouth, as we would say in plain terms in my country, because one hears so often, my country is so badly affected by what's happening to the climate, and as we know, there are very bad effects. But on the other hand, I have oil and gas reserves, and I've got an absolute right to exploit them. Now, the two aren't really compatible, because no amount of adaptation is going to make up for a runaway heating climate. So here I think we count on the leadership and energy of young people to be pointing out the contradictions in these positions. What would you say, Flavia, coming back on the point where Juan Manuel ended?
Thank you for pointing that out, because Brazil must have a choice. We are the climate leaders or the giant of petrol. And we are already the 6th biggest oil producer in the world. And one of the goals of the government is to get to the 3rd position. And how we can balance that account. That, I think, is the biggest pressure underground right now. But we do not have the entire community focus on the same goal. What I've seen is we do have, when you go to a developing country, of course Brazil is an emergent one, but it's still the complexity of Brazil puts sometimes us in a developed one, sometimes in a developing one. So we have to look to the bigger picture. And when we see that there are so many social issues we have to face still, that people are not engaging in understanding why should we take off the road of the petrol, because the development of the country, so it's kind of a divide audience in Brazil. So where should we go? That's why the climate civil society, mostly the young people as well, we are trying to advocate for that, but mostly democratizing the education regards on climate issues. The schools are not talking about it, or the streets is still not so engaged, and people, they do not relate it, the development of the country based on petrol and climate change. And it's really tricky to combine both sides and explain life's harder. Yeah, it's gonna get worse. So how can we embrace that if people are already facing so many challenges during their daily lives? That's why we are keen to see the election process that we are facing in 2 weeks from now in a municipality level, but also the position that President Lula is going to give on his speech next week. He must choose. And with COP30, we do hope he chooses to be the climate leader. But I'm not that hopeful still. I wish I could be here telling you guys, no, we are going there, we are hitting the road to be the climate leaders, but we are not sure yet. But of course, we're doing whatever you can, even through the laws, and to try to protect our biomas and to embrace civil society, to bring the connection between what's going on and their daily lives. We already have the electricity bills in Brazil even higher because there is no rain, and we have the cleanest energy base in the world, but it still is not raining, so the electricity bill is getting higher. Everything that must be produced by electricity means everything is even more expensive, so the gap between poor and rich, it's increasing. There's a lot going on, and people still do not make that connection. So there's like a lot of challenge over there, and I do hope next week we have like the ship turning to the right place on the climate road.
Yes, we're going to move to a question on the type of leadership needed to tackle these threats, and I sometimes think that it's a bonus if we've got national leaders who are on board, because so often the leadership is going to have to come from beneath. And Fatu, when you talked about the community level leadership during the Ebola crisis in West Africa, it brought back so many memories to me, having visited in 2015, including your country, and seen the leadership at the community level. I remember going to an informal settlement that was sort of cascading down from a road to the water. The community there completely locked itself off to keep itself safe from Ebola. Government didn't do it for them. They took it into their own hands. They showed incredible leadership. I saw in Liberia the young people stepping up to be the contact tracers at significant risk to themselves and so on. So when we talk about the type of leadership, we can't overlook that all of us can be leaders. And we've seen the young people, the women, the CSOs really mobilise to bring that leadership. Would you like to elaborate a wee bit more on that theme and how it helps us cope with these existential crises we're facing?
Absolutely. And thank you for centering us around that, because I keep saying it's one thing to mobilize, and with mobilization comes accountability. With accountability comes listening. And with listening and hearing, it means we have to share power. It means that we on the seat, when the decision, I think from the video, equitable decision making, we need to be able to, even at national level, ensure that it's young people, it's community members, it is women, it is girls, their stories, their lived realities that are sitting and being a part of it. It is, for me, every time we have these discussions, the heart of what we want to see in this world has to be centered in the needs and the realities of people. It has to be. I'll give you an example. You know, not only did I do the Ebola crisis in Sierra Leone, personally for me, shifted the trajectory of who I am as a person. I was, my father was a humanitarian worker for 30 years, and so I went into global development, believing in it wholeheartedly that it was the way forward, that the global health system, global development was the way forward. Ebola showed me that there had to be another way. I pivoted specifically into emergencies because I wanted to at least go to bed at night knowing that my job was to stop the bleeding, the acute bleeding in any humanitarian setting, and then leave all the lots of policy and talking to other people. And so it took me to the DRC, and I was part of the 10th and the 11th Ebola response. But I'll give you a concrete example as to why communities and women in particular matter. So during the time in Sierra Leone, when as a Sierra Leonean, as an, it's different when it's happening to you and to your people. And everybody was thinking about how do we stop transmission. We started to stop transmission across the country. And then we were leaving survivors. They were coming out of the Ebola treatment centers, women, girls, and it was $50 and a certificate that said, I survived Ebola, go figure it out. Okay, it's crazy. So my sisters and I, we founded the first and local, I can comfortably say this, local organization to help women and girls integrate back into society, advocate for girls to go back to school, help have nurses who had survived Ebola go back into the workplace and deal with the stigma that's around it, and to actually amplify the voices of women. Tell us your story. Why, you were hearing all the messages, what stopped you? They were saying, how do I not hug my child that is sick? How do I not help my mother when she's dying? These stories will help us who are sitting thinking about vaccine, thinking about surveillance, understand behavior, understand the realities of people's humanity. And it took that local, it's just us. It took us as local citizens to say, this is a gap, no one is funding it, we will raise the capital to ensure that our women and girls that were thankfully leaving the treatment centers, we would carry them, we would touch them. We were the first, huh? We didn't even know if you could touch someone coming out of the Ebola treatment center. I think about it now and I'm like, ooh, that was a little dangerous, you know? But you think about it afterwards. I went to the DRC, I was in Bandaka, and Bandaka, during the 11th Ebola response, and that time I was working for a global organization, they sent me there. I thought that was interesting. I don't really speak French or Lingala very well, but okay. I went there, and we had a roundtable discussion with women who were the front lines, like Flavia, who were like lawyers, and they had community mobilizers, and they looked at us and said, look, we are tired of having this conversation. You don't give us the money to be able to you don't resource us to support our communities. You don't trust what we tell you. Please stop bringing us together to tell us to be able to be the conduits and trusted conduits with our communities if you don't inherently trust us. So I will, thank you. So I think this conversation, to your question, in the heart of communities and why it matters, we have to move beyond rhetoric. There is no time. We saw that with Ebola. We see, as an African, in the African bloc, we always talk about adaptation for climate. It matters to us as the lowest emitters of climate issues. We want adaptation. We're asking because that's what we need. I think that, and then with the COVID pandemic across the world that affected all of us, and even us in developed worlds, we began to see that it's extremely important to trust, to listen to the voices of people and to trust what they're saying. To trust what they're saying so that when we're making decisions, we're sitting at that table. We have to move from lip service to saying, women are always disproportionately affected by this, by that, and then we do anything but actually support, listen, resource the women at the front lines. It's absurd. We were talking about it, right? So at the end of the day, the question becomes, how do we, and I really don't have the answer. Well, I want to know, I want us to think about it. What does it look like to reimagine a world wherein leadership is understood as already existing, people are already empowered, their agencies are already there? How do we leverage that, pull that, and ensure that it is in the right place at the right time, informing and directing the resources required for really transformative change to happen?
Wow. So Juan Manuel, that leads me to ask you, can we reimagine what the leadership is required to deal with these threats we're facing?
No, I think it is possible. I know it's difficult. How can you make it compatible, for example, two specific examples that I read about recently? On the one hand, in Uganda, it's a crime to cut trees down. And this woman, mother of 3 children, was caught cutting trees. And she was going to be taken to jail, put in jail. And they told her, if you promise that you will not do it again, you will not go to jail. And she was very honest, and she said, I cannot do that, because with what I do, I feed my children. At the same time, just 3 days ago, we were reading that in, I think it was Botswana, they're eating elephants because the drought has had a terrible consequence in the supply of food. Or Zimbabwe, I think it was. The cause and the effect. That's why in today's leadership, you have to have an integrated approach and have the ability, and again, to lead is to listen, but also to lead is to teach. have the ability to explain and teach and convince people to act and act as fast as possible, because we have 2 years to domesticate, if we can use a word, AI, and we have less than 6 years, according to the planetary guardians, less than 6 years to save the planet. And so this is a matter of urgency. How can we make the people and the leaders and the world conscious of this urgency? That is the type of leadership that we need. And also, and let me finish with this, everything is interrelated. You were talking about the COP16 in Colombia. We have the COP at the end of the next month, of this month. Yeah. But we have COP30 or COP29 first, and then COP30. COP29, nobody mentions it, no? Like if it did not exist. Well, there should be only one COP, because biodiversity and climate change are the same thing. It's a coin with two faces. If there is no biodiversity, there will not be climate change will simply not be possible to combat. Or if we don't control climate change, the biodiversity will disappear. And the same thing with the pandemics. You have to teach people that you continue to destroy the forest, the animals will get in contact with humans, and the pandemics will increase exponentially. So that's an integrated approach would be the solution right now, that here in the UN, that's where that should be happening. It's not because of geopolitical short-term interest, but if leaders are willing to do away with those geopolitical short-term interests, the world can be saved.
Thank you, Flavia. You're itching to come in here.
Yeah, just to add 3 quick points. In order to reimagine, we must think systemically, like combining biodiversity, climate change, and pandemics and everything else. But also, we must have, to show opportunities. I met that man in the Amazon forest, and he used to cutting trees. And when he realized there was different opportunities to raise incomes and protecting the forest, he shifted, and now he's the guardian of the forest. And talking to him, I could feel it, that once people understand the green economic approach of it, we can shift a lot. And we cannot, of course, forget about climate justice. Climate justice as a tool to humanize the biggest challenge we are facing right now. And if you're not wearing those glasses of climate justice to think through all the process, we might end up doing exactly the same thing. And we must think outside the box to bring different results. And easy to say, but quite challenging to develop. And everyone who is come to me to present a project law or a project, I'm always asking, are you comfortable with what you are bringing up? If they tell me, yes, I'm comfortable, I always tell to him, okay, so just take away, it's not good enough. And they're like, why not? I said, if you're comfortable, we're not doing anything different. So you must face the uncomfortable inside yourself, in order to be able to bring something new to the world.
Thank you. I see our lovely moderator wants to give us a hurry up and open up to the audience, correct?
Exactly, Helen. Thank you all so much for that candid conversation. It is your chance now to ask our brilliant panel your burning questions. If you have a question, please raise your hand. We'll get a microphone to you. Please make clear who on the panel your question is for. There's so much experience and knowledge on the stage here, and we want to share this conversation with as many voices as possible. So please do keep your questions and answers as succinct as possible. We thank you very much indeed. That young lady over there has a question.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. My question is directed at President Santos, but it's also for the entire panel to respond. You have said that climate change and biodiversity loss are deeply interconnected. How can we better integrate climate in nature action? How do we make it happen? Thank you.
Thank you. We could start by, instead of having two COPs, have one. And all the effort and the political work that has to be done, you can increase it by generating that synergy between the two COPs. And make people and the industries and the governments conscious that they are one of the same thing, two challenges of the same problem. Again, by explaining to the people why biodiversity is in danger if we don't fight climate change, and why climate change will get worse and worse if we don't protect our biodiversity. It's very simple. However, and I will end with this because I think this is important. Again, the short-term political interest, climate and conflict. Climate change is generating more and more conflicts. The United Nations was created to avoid conflict, to promote peace. I went, invited by the United Emirates to the United Nations Security Council before the COP28, to ask the Security Council to do something which is very simple and common sense. Listen, Security Council, you were created to avoid conflict. Therefore, you should get engaged, get involved with climate change, because the Security Council has so far said no. Because of geopolitical considerations, that suggestion was vetoed by China and by Russia. But I was informed yesterday that in the draft of the Summit for the Future, that same consideration was included until yesterday and was taken away because India said no. And my question is, why? If it's so common sense, so simple, so important, why do they take it off? Again, short-term geopolitical or political interest. And that's what we have to fight against.
I'd just add that I think we could collapse 3 COPs into one, because there were 3 great conventions out of the Earth Summit in 1992. We've talked about 2 of them, but there's a third, the Convention to Combat Desertification, which also is so linked to the climate issues and so linked to biodiversity. So, bringing these into a powerful COP for nature across the 3 conventions, could be every 2 years, who knows, and getting it properly prepared, we might get better results.
Thank you. Gentleman over here. Can we get a microphone? Over here, please.
Former President of the Maldives, please.
Yes, please. Here you go.
I have a feeling that it can be done. How to bring climate to the top of the agenda. I think if we start framing climate issues as an opportunity instead of an austerity measure, it probably would fly better. Right now, I have a feeling that we are framing it as an austerity measure. So if we can start talking about climate prosperity plans, I work for the Climate Vulnerable Forum now. We do what we call the climate prosperity plans. These are low carbon development strategies that would hopefully give you the same economic outcomes, but with less damage to the planet. Now, Brazil is going into local elections, and if these local elections are not talking about climate issues, it's probably, in my mind, because they are framing the manifestos where climate becomes a burden, or protection of the environment becomes a burden. Now, if we value our eco-service of nature, or the asset value of nature, and then go into carbon credits and carbon exchanges, we probably can save the tree so that it is more valuable by keeping it alive instead of cutting it down. The IMF, I think, has framed carbon at $85 a ton to keep 1.5 degrees. A usual tree apparently sinks 15 kilograms of carbon.
Thank you, sir. Anybody want to comment?
Well,
Anyone have
I
any
think-
thoughts?
I just think there's a ton of evidence out there, with reports like the New Climate Economy one, that you can make a green economy, one that is prosperous and job-rich and meets people's, expectations for a decent life. We have to believe this is possible, and the evidence points that way. But it will take long-view leadership to bring populations to see that that's the path that can deliver.
Yeah, and regarding the municipality elections in Brazil, I think one part of it is because of the narrative as a burden. Okay, so I cannot solve anymore the problem, I'm not doing anything regarding this. But also the disconnection between the problems and climate change, and also because the abundance of nature in Brazil, people take for granted sometimes, and they think it's going to be there forever. And because as well we have like the mandate is within 4 and 4 years, and it's not my problem, it's the next one problem. So it's like it's a mix of a lot of issues combining together that bring us to the moment, that moment we are now, where we are not connecting still in the 21st century, in the municipality elections, climate change and politics in a row.
So just very quickly, I was going to speak to your point as you were speaking, President Santos. I was really thinking how I'm going to bring it all the way back to my little community level, but how important it is that we are thinking intersectionally, we're thinking cross-sectorally, we're working together, even within national and community systems. If I were to dream bold and to be the president of my own country, I think what would be interesting would be to see a Ministry of Planetary Health. Because I think that's where it starts. How do we begin within one ministry at a policy level, begin to connect climate or environment and health and gender? And it's important that we begin to have our ministries, our policies work for us on a day-to-day basis. We know where I come from, heat is killing our women. We know heat is killing our people. We feel it every day. We see the displacement, like you were rightly speaking, it is lived. The word and the language, and to name what is happening. Now we say climate change. Everyone says climate. Okay. At that level, what does it mean? And so I think if we begin to have our national systems and leadership that really begin to structure their systems in a way that feels holistic and names the daily realities of people, I think that there's a lot. I feel like there'll be a lot more commitment there, and there's a lot more intersectionality, as you were rightly pointing out.
No, I think you're right. We also need the positive side to stimulate people to do the right thing. In every peace process, you need a carrot and a stick. And the peace with nature needs a carrot and a stick. And the carrot is very important. For example, this lady from Uganda, if you pay them not to cut the trees, that would solve the problem. Climate justice, Mary wrote a book about it. So you are very correct because, and this is another message from the elders, the last thing that we should do is to lose hope. We have to maintain hope, and we have to be optimistic that we can, in 6 years, correct some of the trends that we're seeing, and in 2 years, hopefully, domesticate AI. We have to still believe that we can. Otherwise, we will never achieve the goals.
Brilliant. We have to wrap it up soon. Very quickly, if you have more questions, we have time for one more? Okay, one more quick question. Oh, sorry, the lady in the back. Yes, please.
Thank you so much. Good morning. Lily Hunsmana with the Baha'i International Community. And I was horrified by that short film at the very beginning. I think most of us probably felt that way. And all the challenges that you describe sound very overwhelming, and I think it can bring a sense of despair, particularly for young people. And so I'm curious, for all the panelists, whoever would like to answer, what we need, I think we need this sense of commitment and long-term energy to face all of this. So I wonder, what brings you optimism? Where do you find a sense of optimism to continue the work that you're doing? And what brings you a sense of hope in the face of all the challenges that we have ahead of us?
Who'd like to go first? Everybody should take a shot at this question.
I think you have to break down complex problems so that you can support a sense of agency at the community and individual level. There's things every one of us can do. So if we break it down to, well, what could our contribution be at the individual level, the community level, society-wide, leadership level, and believe that it is possible. Look at where the successes have been, build on them. I mean, globally we face, not the greatest outlook, but there are, spots of enlightenment and progress. Let's hear more about them and build on the good things that are happening.
People, where I come from, when I travel across the continent, the resilience, and that word is so overused, but really the strength of my people keeps me going all the time, regardless, despite, they will wake up and they will give and they will show up and they will try, even when the onus is on young people who can barely get jobs, who can barely survive. I mean, the onus is on them. They still show up. Today, what gives me hope, in addition to that, because after a while working for me in the field, I was tired, I'm not gonna lie, I was exhausted, and also to even have space and to have elders and leaders who want to open doors for us, it's not forthcoming, so you get tired. So thank you for the space, all of you elders. But what recently has reignited my hope is being a new mom, my daughter. The urgency, just every time I look at her, truly, it changed me, and I think every day now it's for her. I don't want her to say, well, she's gonna say, we inherited a pretty, but we can be like, you saw us try. You saw what trying looks like, so you have to try as well.
So what gives me hope is I do believe that as humanity, we got here, and it's like the energy we waste to develop the society we live in today is the same to build up something new. And I do believe our creativity, our skills to think outside the box, and we do already have nature in abundance, and we are lucky to be here alive and to be able to build up something different. I truly believe we are in a moment of a jump of era, we are opening a new door. We are choosing the regeneration path, and it's not easy. We are in the middle of the chaos right now, but there is already some answers. The science is helping us. We already have all the tools in our hands, so why not? And it's not a matter of choice to not have hope. Every day I wake up, of course not easy sometimes, I feel tired as well, being the front line, but connecting with the youth daily lives and seeing the lack of future they are facing, it's so unfair. So we do not have choice. We have to keep going. And every time I'm with the community and being together with so many brilliant people in Brazil and all over the world, we're not alone on that, and we are stronger, and we are smarter, and we are here to not only protect, but coexist with nature. And I do believe we are facing the path of regeneration. That's why I never will give up hope, even if I'm tired some days.
President Santos, last quick word to you.
Well, my hope is fed by history. The fact that we have been 70 years with nuclear bombs without a nuclear war, that gives me hope that sooner rather than later we will come to our senses and try to bring down the arsenal of nuclear weapons. The same with climate change. You see already many examples of success at a local level, regeneration of the agriculture, and many examples. And I think if you multiply that, the economists call it the demonstration effect, we will succeed also in our challenge with climate change and saving nature.
Thank you all so very much. So many vital insights, important lessons, and thank you for your questions as well. Remember, you can send more questions that we'll answer after the event on slido.com. And now let's have a look at this important message on the nuclear threat.
For the first time in decades, the use of nuclear weapons has been openly raised. We are calling on leaders to meet the urgency of this challenge with courage, to foster dialogue and cooperation where there is enmity, and commit to a shared vision of peace for humanity. We need long-view leadership to ensure the safety of current and future generations. Will our leaders rise to the challenge?
My name is Olamide Samuel, and I'm a Nuclear Policy Fellow at the European Leadership Network. Nuclear weapons present an existential risk to all of humanity. Nowhere on Earth is safe. A full-scale nuclear war would create global nuclear winter. A nuclear winter that could result in the death of over 5 billion people. Every single conflict in the world today involving a nuclear weapon state has the potential to escalate into a full-scale nuclear war. It could be because of a flaw in the design or command and control of nuclear weapons arsenals, and it could also be because of a misinterpretation of a strategic move by an adversary. Mitigating nuclear threats is a wicked and complex problem and requires complex and programmatic solutions. Global leaders should come together utilizing existing multilateral tools, such as the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and establishing new multilateral tools for disarmament, such as the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. We can achieve nuclear disarmament, but it requires global buy-in. It requires long-view leadership, and it is something that is feasible if we start now.
A world free from the threat of nuclear destruction is possible. We need leaders to commit to this vision of hope, not play to our divided past. It's time for bold, new thinking.
We must work together across generations to prevent nuclear catastrophe. And now, we have here with us today as well, Elder President Ernesto Zedillo. He would like to share some thoughts with us. Sir, let's listen to what he has to say.
Madam Chair, dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, first I want to apologize because I was supposed to be formally part of this program, but I was incapable of confirming my participation because over the last few days and weeks, I had been observing the evolution of a terrible threat, and I had to engage in that problem. That threat is the threat almost realized to Mexican democracy. As of last Sunday, on September 15, constitutionally, the independent judiciary of Mexico has disappeared. The judiciary will become an office, literally, under the control of the government controlled by what has become a ruling party. Within the next few days, other constitutional reforms will be passed by Congress to destroy the independent electoral authorities and the electoral tribunal. Within the next few days, other electoral constitutional reforms will be passed to destroy other autonomous institutions of the Mexican state, particularly the one in charge of transparency or protecting the right of information. Over the next few days, a constitutional reform will be passed to give the Mexican armed forces enhanced roles to control the national police and also to undertake economic activities for which they will have no accountability and transparency. All of this is being done by having committed a fraud to the Mexican Constitution, because only through fraud the ruling party has established a majority that is able to pass constitutional reforms. It has been in front of everybody how that qualified majority was built, literally using means only of gangsters or criminals. So soon we will have the foundations in Mexico to transform our democracy into an autocracy of one rule party or even a tyranny. I decided, I haven't spoken about Mexican politics since I left office in 2000, and I decided that I couldn't be quiet. I decided to use the International Bar Association annual meeting that by chance, because this was decided many years ago for them to have their meeting in Mexico, precisely on September 15. Almost a year ago, they invited me to be a speaker, their keynote speaker in the opening ceremony, and I was noticing events in Mexico, and I decided to use that tribune to accuse the president of Mexico, the ruling party, of the crime that they are committing against the Mexican democracy. I have continued to do that by other means. I came back to my class to teach my class Monday morning, so I have to fly a red-eye flight back to New Haven. But from New Haven, from my office, I am raising my voice to alert to the world what is happening in my country. Needless to say, throughout this week, I have been the object of insults, calumnies, and threats from the part of the president himself, and sadly also from the part of the president-elect. And my only response has been to her, our next president, that on October 1st, she will have to make a choice. Will she be the face without power of a tyranny, or will she decide to be the president of a democratic, progressive republic? It will be up to her. So I wanted to make that comment, but I also wanted to support what has been presented here on the nuclear threat. What Max showed is absolutely true. That was not a video well done based on hard scientific data. I want to repeat an anecdote, which is not an anecdote, it's a dramatic event. It was told to me, and I say it because an elder is involved in that. Some years ago, right, a few years before he died, I happened to be with Zbigniew Brzezinski, who was the National Security Advisor to President Carter, our beloved elder. From here, I send you my love, dear Jimmy. And Zbigniew told me that one night at 2 in the morning, he received a call from General Odon, who was chief of military staff, I don't know how they call it, in the US government, and said, Mr. Zbigniew, you must call the president. The Soviets have launched a nuclear attack on the United States, and the protocol indicates that the president is informed so that we can do the same, retaliate. Why? Because that was the whole idea of nuclear deterrence, MAD, math, mutual assured destruction. If you do it, I will do it, and everybody is gone. So Brzezinski said, what? Yes, it was just launched, and Brzezinski asked, how many minutes do I have? Sorry, I have to say this. How many minutes do we have? He said, 20 minutes before the nuclear rockets hit our territory. And Brzezinski responded, please verify. A few minutes later, Odon calls back and said, confirm, sir. The Soviets did launch the attack. You must wake up the president because he must give the order that we push the button. And say, how many minutes are left? 10 minutes. You know what, General? Verify again. 5 minutes later, the general calls and says, Mr. Brzezinski, false alarm. There was a failure in our system. It was not true. But we were 5 minutes from not being here right now. So thanks, Max. That can happen, and perhaps today is more likely to happen than it was when Jimmy Carter was president.
Thank you, President Zedillo, and sorry to rush you. I'm keeping a watch on the clock. Thank you for sharing that with us. In my humble opinion, we need more such frank communication. And now, to talk about nuclear disarmament, please welcome Izumi Nakamitsu, UN Under-Secretary General and High Representative for Disarmament Affairs. Please join me on stage. And Emma Pike, Youth Disarmament Advocate. Ladies, the stage is yours.
Well, yes, it's working. I want to start off by saying it is such a joy and a privilege for me to share this stage with you. Thank you so much for being here. I think maybe we'll start off, because our time is quite limited. Although this has been, already illustrated today, I really want to begin today by emphasizing truly the urgency of this moment, because I think sometimes when the topic of nuclear weapons and nuclear disarmament comes up, it is perhaps the most invisible of the topics that we're talking about today. And so sometimes it feels like, we've gone 80 years, more or less, without nuclear weapons being used in war. Probably it won't happen. And that's a very prevailing sort of idea. But actually, as we've seen today, it's widely sort of agreed that this moment is at least the most dangerous and sort of the closest we are to potential nuclear war closest that we've been since the height of the Cold War, at least, right? And of course, we, on top of that, live in an increasingly complicated world with so many more factors at play, with multiple nuclear-armed states directly involved in conflict at this moment. And I just really want to begin today by re-emphasizing that anytime we talk about nuclear weapons, it's so important to be very clear with ourselves that it's not an abstract threat, and that genuinely this is something that, you know, when it fails, because, you know, unless we're able to abolish nuclear weapons first, as long as they exist, sooner or later, eventually they will be used. That is statistics. And so, you know, what we're talking about is just a level of catastrophe and humanitarian disaster, environmental disaster that is, you know, unacceptable. Doesn't even feel like the strong enough word to use, but you know, that's really what we're talking about. And we're also in this moment of sort of a resurgence of nuclear deterrence theory, and which is a scary thing as well, because, you know, deterrence may work until it doesn't. And what we do know very well is what happens when it fails. And so I just want to sort of set this scene of we're in a moment where for any states to continue to hold on to their nuclear weapons is a very sort of both naive, right, to center your security policy around essentially the hope that we will remain lucky forever. Is not only naive, but it's incredibly irresponsible at this moment, right? Because that decision affects all of us equally. And so I want to sort of, just start there and sort of see, that's how I see the current moment in terms of nuclear weapons and sort of really the urgency of nuclear disarmament. But I'm curious to know how you see it, and also from your perspective, what are the biggest obstacles to disarmament, do you think?
Well, thank you very much. Very nice to share the panel, the stage with you, Emma. I think the acute and most urgent risk that you portrayed now, I think, is very much the same perspectives that we see at the United Nations. I personally don't think, I hope, no one really wants to use or detonate nuclear weapons intentionally, but you know, a small misunderstandings, miscalculations, etc., actually leading to a potential detonation of a nuclear weapon today, when there are active wars going on, and there is a lack of dialogue, lack of communication, lack of engagements between those competing states. That's a fertile ground for actually inviting mistakes, leading to uncontrollable escalation, leading to a potential detonation of a nuclear weapon. So I think the risk is definitely at the highest, as you put it, since the height of the Cold War, that is the previous Cold War. I remember I was a student studying international security issues then. The difference between now and then, I think, is that at the time, as many of the elders will remember, and probably they were part of it, the nuclear risks are very visible. At the height of the previous Cold War. And partly thanks to the post-Cold War period that continued for about 25, 30 years, that risk gradually went away. And now we are back to a new Cold War-like, much more complicated international security context. And so I think it is very important that we raise awareness of this acute risk and think very creatively about how to bring back that common perception that we need to really tackle the risk of nuclear weapons. And by the way, it is definitely an existential risk.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like, what you said about needing to bring back a common sort of perception that this really is something we need to tackle. One thing I have been thinking about a lot recently is, a lot of people, when they hear that this is something I work on, say that sounds like a wonderful idea. Of course, nobody wants to live in a world with nuclear weapons, and nobody wants to see them used, but it just doesn't feel possible. And I think, it is very easy to feel like we will always live in a world with nuclear weapons. But the reality is that only 9 countries have them, right, at the moment. And there was definitely a moment, let's say after the Cuban Missile Crisis, which was potentially, one of the most sort of visible risks of nuclear war, the world came together and was able to negotiate the Non-Proliferation Treaty, right, which meant that no new countries could have nuclear weapons, and that could have very easily gone a different way. And same thing, sort of in the 80s when there was another. I was not there, but looking back at that sort of moment in history, it's another moment where there was, as far as I have heard and can tell, there was a very, very palpable fear that this really might be something that happens. And the response, the global response, right, was to negotiate massive reductions. And I think, another sort of in that same line of thought, there is a massive, I would say, majority of the global community, and this is where you might have a different perspective, I would like to ask you, but there are many, many states. In fact, most countries, right, have really chosen not to have nuclear weapons. And I think a lot of times when we talk about this issue, it feels like the only actors that have any sort of power to do anything are the countries with nuclear weapons. But in fact, that's not true, right? And I'm really curious to know, from your perspective and in your experience, what is the role of the non-nuclear armed states? Because, for example, we have the tools for disarmament, right? We have the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, 122 countries that voted in favor for this treaty, right? About half of the countries now of the world who have signed on to this treaty, which is so new, just a few years old. And so I think a lot about this perspective of the countries that do not have nuclear weapons and have really actively chosen that I feel sometimes maybe they have a more important role to play than we show. But I'm curious to know sort of what your thoughts are on the role of those states.
Okay, no, thank you. I mean, I think there's a very important role or roles that non-nuclear weapon states and even very small states can play. But before getting into that, you mentioned Cuban Missile Crisis. We heard in the previous sessions a lot about political leadership. What Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962 did was that President Kennedy in this country and General Secretary Khrushchev of the Soviet Union at the time, they actually realized that, whoops, this is too dangerous for both of us. They shared a common sense of acute risk between the two, so they actually decided to engage with each other, and within a year, actually less than a year, they managed to agree on partial nuclear test ban treaty, 63. This is a demonstration of a really courageous leadership. You can actually read what Kennedy was saying. He had to, of course, sell this to the Senate for ratifications. The speeches that he was making within the US, really arguing that unlimited arms race is actually going to backfire on our security in the United States. Arms control, disarmament, and diplomacy actually are useful instruments for our own national security, and this is what I can say. This will be beneficial to the United States security. So at the time, the two largest nuclear weapon states actually took the initiative, the leadership, and then engaged with each other, and they were able to agree. And then, of course, in the same period, a small country called Ireland came out with this idea in the General Assembly of the United Nations, which actually became the seed for NPT, Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which was then, of course, picked up by all nuclear weapon states at the time. And therefore, we have the NPT Treaty, which still today, I think all member states of the UN agree that it is one of the most important pillars of international security. So what I'm saying is that we need to have political leadership from all countries, of course, nuclear weapon states included, smaller states, non-nuclear weapon states. UN is a very interesting place. If they have an ability, capacity to come up with a vision, good proposal, good ideas, and if they have the ability to make alliances, who shares that vision, then you can create a force, ability in the international community to create an instrument that will be useful for international security and engage with those bigger states. I never call these states great powers because what they do very often are not so great. But we can engage big military powers with the legitimacy that carries the number of, the power of numbers of those small states, non-nuclear weapon states. Together, if we have a good strategy and good alliance, we can move the needles. Now, nuclear disarmament, unfortunately, is not, there is no silver bullet. It's a very complicated jigsaw puzzle, if you will. So you need to make sure that all pieces are actually fitted in the right place. And today, we also have a new instrument called Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. That was, again, a number of smaller states, non-nuclear weapon states, coming together to create international momentum. And now working together with those different jigsaw puzzle pieces. But I think the first step we need to really absolutely take urgently is to make sure that no nuclear weapon is used. The norm against the use of nuclear weapons absolutely must be upheld. If even by mistake one is detonated, then what we saw in the beginning of the session today, they will be potentially, likely, a total nuclear war. So we need to take this risk very seriously and make sure that a norm against the use is absolutely upheld.
Yes, absolutely. And as you were speaking, I was reminded actually that I wanted to thank at the beginning President Cedillo for sharing what he did, because I think that example of having the courage, the wisdom, but also really the courage to speak up when one feels it's very important, but also when you know that it is something that can receive backlash. That, I think, is, at least from my perspective, actually crucial and essential to our discussion, because, and as well, as you had mentioned earlier, President Santos, this importance of being able to genuinely engage and genuinely talk in order to understand. Again, this is I'm primarily outside of the multilateral system, so this is just my sort of personal feeling, but I genuinely believe that that kind of desire to engage, which is what you just described in the wake of the Cuban Missile Crisis, and also when I think of in the 80s in Reykjavik, when that was also a genuine sort of opportunity to engage, to try to understand the other. How do you see that sort of, I don't know, opportunities for that kind of engagement now? Because I get the sense that there is so much fear and mistrust that sort of feeds the continued existence of nuclear weapons. And so, I'm curious to know your sort of thoughts from your perspective on that.
Right. I mean, unfortunately, there's very little direct engagements between those big military powers, especially with the Russian Federation. And that is a very worrying situation. I take it, we believe that it's part of our job, therefore, as the United Nations, to maintain good, close dialogues with all member states, And we encourage wherever and whenever possible for all of them to directly engage. There is one platform that is still sort of alive and still continuing, which is within the framework of the NPT. It's called N5, Nuclear 5 Consultations, within the NPT framework. I just recently returned from China. China is now, they have a rotating coordinator of that N5 group. China is the new coordinator of that group, so I was trying to find out and encourage the Chinese to really reactivate that platform, because direct engagement between nuclear weapon states, to start with, trust building, confidence building, transparency discussions, all these things are absolutely crucial to avoid potential mistakes. But it is also true that diplomacy and direct engagement dialogue is very scarce these days, and that is because of the ongoing war. So what I would actually suggest is that citizen to citizen, youth to youth engagement between those countries, civil society engagements between those countries actually are becoming even more important today. That was also a little bit like that in the previous Cold War, I remember. So I think we need to make sure that young people who have, different ways of communicating with each other intensify their efforts and make sure that they find solutions to the problems that the old generation created. I'm sorry.
I know we don't have too much time left, so I'll sort of leave this as my own last thought, but I'm so heartened to hear you say that and so encouraged. So thank you so much, because one thing, again, that you had mentioned earlier, President Santos, was that leadership understands pressure and leadership responds to pressure. And I really want to, if there is anyone listening to this that perhaps has felt like they want to say something about this issue or feel genuinely, it's really not okay that we live under this threat at all times. I want to just share that one sort of pattern that I see, especially among young people, emerging now is that nuclear weapons and the issue of nuclear weapons is increasingly becoming linked with, in people's minds, with sort of other systems of oppression that people see, other sort of manifestations of this idea that, regardless of others, it's okay for us, perhaps in the case of nuclear weapons, it's okay for a state to pursue just their own interests with no regard for others. And I think at least the young people that I engage are increasingly truly recognizing that our world is so interdependent that nuclear weapons genuinely have no place in that. They are just fundamentally incompatible, right, with an interdependent world, and are fundamentally incompatible with life. And so I think that gives me a lot of hope that people really are, I think, beginning to sort of awaken to this reality that this is not just sort of something in the background that will always be there and we don't really have the capacity to face or think about, but that it's genuinely sort of, it's part of this greater pattern of sort of disrespect for life and for humanity, right? And so, yeah, perhaps actually I'll leave it at that, but I don't know if you have anything to share.
Thank you. Yes, it's the security for all of us. It's a security primarily also for the world that you will be living in. And that's why I think we have to take the issue of nuclear weapons very close to our heart. As you started our conversation, it's not something abstract, but it is a real issue for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you both so very much indeed. May your efforts help generate momentum towards the elimination of the nuclear threat. We must keep striving towards that. So let's have a look now at this message on artificial intelligence.
Artificial intelligence has the potential to provide huge benefits to humanity, but its rapid, ungoverned development comes with great risks. We are calling on world leaders to develop strong international governance that allows humanity to take advantage of AI's opportunities, to ensure AI is a force for good, and not allow it to be a runaway risk. It's time for long-view leadership. Will our leaders rise to the challenge?
I'm Kate Caddo. I'm the founder and CEO of Animi.
My name is Stuart Russell. I'm a professor of computer science at the University of California, Berkeley.
We're dealing today with a technology that's accelerating extremely fast. And if it continues to go unregulated, we are facing a place where it will be too hard for policymakers to catch up.
So right now we're on a road towards creating what's called AGI, Artificial General Intelligence, which means AI systems that exceed human capabilities in every relevant dimension. And then we have a question: how do we retain power forever over entities more powerful than ourselves? The biggest risk is that the AI systems we create carry out some course of action that results in human extinction. One of the ideas for governing AI in the near term is actually to draw some red lines and say to the developers, the onus is on you to prove that your systems are not going to cross these red lines. So some simple examples would be AI systems should not replicate themselves. They should not advise terrorists on how to build biological weapons. And that means they have to be able to predict and control and understand the technology that they're creating. And that's exactly what they're not doing right now. We have no idea how they work. If we continue along this line where we're creating systems that are more powerful than human beings, and we can provide no guarantees on what internal goals they might have and how they're going to pursue them, that is a recipe for disaster.
It can be absolutely transformative for our lives, but we have to understand that the technology development will not stop. So how do we get ahead? How did we get here? What is to come? And how can we build solutions and build policies that are adapted to their countries and to their people?
To ensure AI is a force for good, not a runaway risk, we need world leaders to cooperate. A multilateral approach rooted in human rights is the only way to ensure the benefits of AI are seen by all. It's time for bold new thinking.
So, how can we develop and use AI ethically and safely? Let's find out what Jan Tallinn, Meredith Whitaker, and Nadara Yusuf think. Please join me up on stage now. Jan is the co-founder of Skype. He advocates for AI governance. He's a member of the UN's high-level advisory body on AI. Meredith is the president of Signal Foundation, the world's largest truly private communications app. And Nadara is an AI governance expert and executive coordinator of the Global Governance Innovation Network and author of the Future of International Cooperation report. It's all yours.
Thank you so much. This has been a fantastic conversation. I think we're going to have a little chit-chat to bring it home a little bit. But I've got to say, it's an interesting time to be a young person and kind of listen to all of this, right? I mean, very short anecdotal story. I was helping my young nephew with his algebra homework. And he was scratching his head, looks up from the table, extremely distraught, and goes, Nadara, why do I need to know what X equals if climate change is existential, if AI doesn't take over first? And I was sort of like, oh, well, that's a great perspective to have as a 13-year-old. But I mean, it's true. I think we are, in the current generations, the first
generations to be able to tackle challenges like artificial intelligence governance, but also the last generations to be able to do something about things like climate change. So there's a real kind of tipping point, I think, in the discussions that we're having. But Jan, you've been thinking quite a lot about tipping points and the worst case scenario. You recently you were on the UN High-Level Advisory Board that's just put out a report on artificial intelligence governance to inform as we go into the Summit of the Future. So you've been thinking about the worst case scenario, but also about the future of what our scenarios could look like. Could you tell us a little bit about your thought process? Is AI an existential threat? What are some of your perspectives?
Thank you very much, Nodara. So my experience in general with talking about AI and participating in various forums is that we have like elephant in the room problem. Like people come with various preconceptions about what AI is and basically how to frame it, and those preconceptions really result in very different views about what is kind of reasonable response or reasonable reasonable risks to anticipate. So I am a physicist, so to me, like, laws of physics are the kind of ultimate constraints, and also I do think, just like if you saw the Oppenheimer movie, like it's important to treat our uncertainty about what we're dealing with as a risk, as not as a reason to feel secure. If we don't know, it doesn't mean that we are safe. So in particular, when I kind of like take a step back and think about what are the sort of framings of risk and framings of like humility about what this thing could be, one of them was already mentioned here, which is AI as second species. You think about, there is a reason why humans are running the show on this planet and not chimpanzees. And the reason kind of cashes out to like a list of capabilities that humans have and chimpanzees do not. And this is also the same list of capabilities that now has the big tech investing hundreds of billions of dollars per year to cross off as human unique capabilities. So that's like one framing. The other kind of perhaps climbing down the ladder of abstraction is economic framing. If you think about the most widely acknowledged concern, global concern, which is global warming, it's stemming from the fact that the human economy as a system and human values, they have a misalignment. There is this economic machine that is mostly aligned with humans, but not quite. So we need to take like extra actions to address this difference. Now, the problem is that this is already hard, and we're going to make it much, much harder with AI, because if you think about what AI is, ultimately these are systems for automated decision-making that are going to get more and more competent and more economically valuable, which means that there already is, we see like if you look at the NVIDIA stock, there already is economic demand for replacing humans with machines and serve the needs of machines rather than humans. I'm at the stage of my life where every couple of years, some of my kids go to university and kind of struggle with a decision about what kind of domain to study. And I really don't envy the young generations, because this is genuinely hard. So my advice to them is that, like, look, do not study things that you think are kind of valuable, that you don't like, but could be valuable for career-wise. There's a high chance that once you graduate university, there will be no economic demand for the thing that you studied. And more generally, as we automate higher and higher proportions of the economy, the less demand, there will be kind of human-specific things. There will be less demand for education. If it's easier to train a machine to do something than human, well, economy, unregulated economy, will just train the machines. And even worse, there will be less, we already see like there will be like less demand for things like art, but most severely, there will be less demand for agriculture. If we don't need humans to participate in the economy, there is no reason to feed them. So I think that's like one of my concerns. But that said, I'm super happy for people to kind of look at what is the current situation, just like Meredith is doing, and what are the actual current trajectories that are seem bad, and kind of push back against them. Not the least, just to kind of exercise the muscle that we have for regulation, because all that I said applies to unregulated trajectory.
I think, Meredith, that's your cue to jump in.
Well, thank you. It's wonderful to be here, and I love being on stage with Jan because we get this sort of, this, the far future and really extrapolating from the information we have into what are the risks and how do we shore up against them, and then more where I live, which is in the present as a materialist, looking at what is AI, what are we actually talking about, and what are the power dynamics that are likely to result in some futures or other futures. Who will be using AI, who gets to develop AI, and on whom will AI be used? Who gets to tell stories about AI, and who is forced to believe those stories or try to re-narrate our world? So I come out of the tech industry, I've been in there about 20 years, and I think a lot about political economy and the flow of capital and power within tech. And so standing in this moment in 2024, one, I have to believe the future is not inevitable, and so this is an invitation to shape a future. And two, I need to look at this industry as it is and recognize first that AI, the term, is more of a marketing term than it is a technical term of art. It was invented over 70 years ago. It's been applied to every old technological thing that touched a computer and that scientists thought they could get grant money for by invoking the name of AI. This is very literally true. And you can look at expert systems, you can look at the deep learning paradigm that currently is the basis for all technologies we now call AI, and recognize that there is a story we need to unpack at the same time that we are unpacking the material components that make up these systems. And that is a story about super intelligent machines that can do hyper capable things better than humans, that we should either bow in devotion or fear to, and that will be replacing us or augmenting us or superseding us in many different capacities across almost every realm of life. And then we need to look at what these systems are. And when we look at what these systems are, we can wind back a little bit to the early 2010s and realize that there was a moment then when a number of ingredients all came together to create where we are now. And that was a moment where people recognized that huge amounts of data, the exact kinds of data that are created and collected by large surveillance platform companies, wind combined with huge amounts of computational power, the exact kind of data centers, server farms, and now NVIDIA chips that are spreading out across our globe to support these platforms, to support this big tech business model. When you combine those two things, data and computational power, with algorithms that were created in the late 1980s, so the AI isn't new, you start to see very interesting performance. You start to see more capable pattern detection and probabilistic results from these models than you had in the past. And that is what has created our AI moment. And because of that, we cannot turn away from the concentration of power in the big tech industry and the fact that the thing we're calling AI right now is in fact a derivative of the monopolistic, centralized, big tech business model, not a novel scientific intervention. And so when we are talking about these probabilistic threats, these futures, this is not an ephemeral scientific discovery that just grew out of different trees and everyone can avail themselves of. No, we know the handful of people who will be making the decision about who gets to use AI and on whom it gets used. And we can go to their doorstep. We recognize the regulatory levers we have. Privacy regulation that cuts off these massive flows of data, powerful regulation, because again, what are those ingredients? Old algorithms, new data, new compute, right? Regulations that structurally separate these massive vertically integrated companies, again, another incredible lever, and a geopolitical recognition that there are only two poles in the world right now that are dominating this form of AI, and that is big tech companies in the US and those in China. This is not an equally available technology, and unless you have these massive platforms, this massive surveillance business model with this huge amounts of data, and the kind of self-reinforcing business model that includes the capital, the network effect, the reach, and an already sort of sustainable kind of economic system, you're not going to be able to just grow up another AI company. So I offer that not as a solution, but I offer that as, I think, a realistic map we need to be looking at, because future visions that are not anchored in the present are delusion, and I don't think we have time for that. So I'm just going to throw that out there. There's so much more I can say, but I'm actually most excited to hear from you, Nadara, and just understand how you're thinking about this as the generation who's really taking this on, and I hope cleaning up some of the mess that some of us have been endeavoring but have yet to clean.
Sorry, I would just kind of like summarize one central concept or thing in what Meredith says. People, look, if you don't do anything about it, AI will be done to you, every one of you. And the more you wait, the harder it will be to counteract the fact that a few companies will do the AI to you now.
I completely agree, Jan, and Meredith, to what you said as well. AI reinforces what we already have out in the world, right? It's not like the data that we have out in the world is biased because our data collection systems have always been biased. There are minority groups that are not represented in the numbers. So that is reinforced again and again through artificial intelligence. And so one of the things that we think quite deeply about in sort of the global governance-y, policy-wonky world is how do we ensure that human intervention remains a part of AI systems? Because that is going to be so important to course correct that natural kind of reinforcing tendency that AI has. So broadly speaking, you have kind of three levels of human intervention with AI. You have human out of the loop, which is, there's just no kind of human intervention happening there. AI learns, generates itself, kind of moves forward. Then you have the human on-the-loop systems, where humans can intervene in the system. They're not part of it, they're not built into it, but they have the capacity to, for example, hit stop on a lethal autonomous weapon, right? But then you have the human in-the-loop systems, which are the ones that we advocate for quite strongly. You actually need to build human intervention. So a person who is thinking with, I mean, we saw earlier in the video, right? Predictability, like the thinking about the uncertainty around AI, built into AI systems. Now that's not always easy to do when innovation paradigms are kind of shifting in their own way. And so we've been thinking about this from a couple different perspectives and lenses. One is in the lethal autonomous weapons model, we called for digital advocates to be coded into lethal autonomous weapons. So if we can't actually have, a human saying to a lethal autonomous weapon, hey, this is bad, it will kill a lot of people, then maybe we could code that in as a digital advocate to include international humanitarian law in lethal autonomous weapon systems. Right? So those are the types of proposals that we're looking at. But equally, just taking like a huge step back, there is a real need to decolonize our approach to artificial intelligence. This looks like, broadly, 5 big things. The first is it must be multidimensional. So you have to bring together the policy wonks with the tech innovators at the frontiers, with the people thinking about power, with the new generations and the older generations. So it must be multidimensional. Secondly, we need to rigorously analyze the harms, both understanding that rights and harms are not static. So you can't intervene at one point in time and say that you've dealt with it. You actually have to monitor and track the evolving harms of a system. And that's like a specifically difficult thing to do in AI that tends to be black box in nature. So that's an important thing to think about. The third is interrogating who actually absorbs those harms. So this is sort of Jan and Meredith, what you were discussing. There's one area where, agriculture and sectors absorb harms, but there's also the question of like, who makes the decision and who is affected by it. So are we actually thinking about that deeply? The fourth is that it's grounded in the rights of minorities. When we think about systems that are sort of self-reinforcing of a current majority thought process, the human rights that we need to be thinking about are the ones that are left out of that thought process. So it's very important to ground the discussion in the rights of minority groups. And finally, it needs to be emergent as part of the process of thinking about artificial intelligence. So decolonizing AI is not a checkbox, like, oh yes, I thought of all these things, fantastic, so let's move forward. It's actually the compass that guides our discussions, and I think we have to think quite deeply. If we're going to, as our keynote speaker said this morning, leverage AI for good, we have to be quite intentional about that being the driving factor and not necessarily kind of unchecked advancement. So those are, some of the things that we're thinking about. But I want to kind of come back to you, Jan, if we've got time for another quick round. Fantastic. Come back to you, Jan. So we're kind of on the sidelines of the Summit of the Future process. I know a lot of people are about to run to the UN as soon as this wraps up. You've been sort of engaged in this report writing, this drafting, this kind of thought process around bringing together multi-stakeholder opinions on AI governance. What's that been like?
I appreciate the look into how the sausage is being made. My kind of main observation is that, again, the thing that I said earlier about the framing problem, the elephant in the room problem, that is like a big obstacle. However, that's like just like one obstacle. The other really big obstacle that UN has is that they have to gather to the member states. So like it has like two really hard constraints. One is, how do you say things that could be at least have some chance of being palatable to the member states, especially the most kind of constraining of them. And the other one is the elephant in the room problem. My understanding of the process is that kind of the Secretariat is sort of like driving force, the agency that has been kind of compiling the report. But then they have to use the AI advisory board as a sounding board. And because this advisory board is quite rightly so, like very diverse, both geographically, gender-wise, and culture-wise, it means that there's it's just super constraining. Like everybody's very vocal and comes with strong opinions what need to be kind of satisfied, which means that at the end of the day, the report can only say fairly abstract, although some of them really good things. For example, I think that central thing is just acknowledging the fact that there is a governance deficit. Again, all these scenarios that are depicted they come to fruition when we do not govern AI, and there is also realization among the companies that they have a shortage of legitimacy. So like UN as the most legitimate organization on this planet, and the AI companies who are going to be, unless we stop them, the most powerful entities on the planet. Perhaps there's like a trade that can be made where, for additional legitimacy, to give up some power.
Yeah, well, I think I'll just say yes. These are huge issues, and they sort of speak to the need to discuss and then the need to act, and the need in acting to recognize that even if the world loses, there are winners to some of these decisions. There is a lot of capital on the table, and there are a lot of people who will, benefit and flourish even as the majority is harmed by this. So that this is not a battle of ideas, this is a battle of power. I think there are 2 points I might just want to put on the table as well in the spirit of synthetic thinking, which I think it's an imperative for these types of issues, right? And we have 4 neat and tidy little quadrants. We have climate, we have nuclear, we have AI, and you always forget the last in a set. But in the context of AI, we can't talk about climate without talking about AI, and frankly, vice versa. The data centers that are required for the thing we call AI now, which is this large scale, laws of scale models infinitely, take up approximately 4 times more energy than a traditional data center, a CPU data center. And what you are seeing in the US is a race to build these data centers. Billions and billions of dollars are being poured into new AI-ready data centers. Now, if they're AI-ready, they're not necessarily fungible for other purposes. These are very highly calibrated, kind of specifically constructed technical architectures that can't just be, reused for something else easily. So this is a massive investment we're seeing. And what we're also seeing in this is that a lot of the green energy that was meant to replace or supplant dirty energy is now going to power these AI centers. The companies can say we're green, but that means that the dirty energy is not being decommissioned. So if we don't actually connect those dots and live with the complexity of what these things are doing, that AI may be opposed to climate, even as large-scale models could parse climate data and give us insights, but if no one is willing to act on that because there isn't an economic incentive, we're not going to use those insights anyway, then we're dabbling in comfortable delusion in an air-conditioned room, not actually dealing with real problems. Secondly, we have to bring up autonomous weapons, and this is really, me speaking from my heart here. Yes, there's a real danger of fully autonomous weapons, these sort of magical beings that, make their own determinations, and their sort of, dominoes fall, and then all of a sudden they are, we're in a war that has been algorithmically constructed and not necessarily the product of rational or irrational human decision making. But of course, those weapons aren't the only dangers from AI. We can look back to the drone war that the US started and look at the signature strike. The signature strike, in my view, is an incredibly evil and unethical kind of military paradigm in which you determine who gets murdered based on their data profile, based on their ad targeting profile, not based on knowing who they are. Their location, their contact lists, their triangulation to a couple cell towers fits the model we have constructed in a lab somewhere else of what a terrorist data profile looks like, and therefore we're going to kill them or a wedding party or what have you. Now, this is a paradigm that is now being supercharged in Gaza via AI-dependent weapons, and if we don't, we didn't stop the signature strike. That is an original sin. I'm sure, there are sins before that, but let's start there. And we now see that metastasized in Gaza on one of the most surveilled populations in the world. And that then becomes the rung in the ladder toward these fully autonomous weapons. And because that was permitted, those become permissible. So again, the future is dependent on the present, and bold leadership needs to name this and stand up against it, not simply abstract 20, 30 years ago and think that that's what a vision is.
I think that's a really powerful outline of the just incentives and power dynamics. I see the MC behind me waiting to chase us off stage from the corner of my eye. So I'm going to just maybe very quickly. I think there's part of the issue that we've had with AI governance is truly understanding what needs to be governed. Is it pace? Is it the data? Is it upstream? Is it downstream? Is it use? Is it incentive structures? Is it why we're doing it? And I think all of these questions only really get answers when we bring together the people that are working on different parts of the problem. So I think being more intentional about bringing together the policy wonks with the tech frontiers, with the people thinking about the human rights side of things, the gender side of things, which is a whole other discussion to touch on, and the intergenerational dialogues are going to be really, really important for us to move in 2 years to tackle the AI governance problems, but also leverage the opportunity that AI brings us. Thank you so much for having a conversation with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You are all brilliant, and I'm so sorry to rush you. This is such an important conversation. AI, global governance, clearly a must, and we need more young leaders, young advocates like Nadara to help shape policy. May more conversations like this take place. And now, very quickly, here's a quick message on the threat of climate change.
We are at a precipice of climate catastrophe. Without a rapid change of direction, the climate and nature crisis will threaten everyone on our planet. To address this, world leaders must put climate justice at the heart of decision-making and urgently implement the climate commitments they have already made. It's time for long-view leadership. Will our leaders rise to the challenge?
Falava. My name is Brianna Fruin, and I'm a proud Pacific climate warrior. I would describe the current state of the climate and nature crisis as multiple crises in one. We're experiencing a soil crisis that also relates to a health crisis because our food isn't as nutritious. There's sea level rise, and there's real conversations about climate-induced migration. But the encouraging thing that we can think about when knowing we're experiencing many things at once is that all of these things are connected. And therefore, if we start pulling at the threads of this woven mat, we can start unraveling them all. Let's be honest about the root cause and what is feeding the climate crisis. And I can honestly say fossil fuels. So we're not addressing the elephant in the room. You can only put a Band-Aid on something before we have to realize we need stitches. The leadership that we need in the climate crisis is already happening in Indigenous communities. It is Indigenous leadership that we have seen protect 80% of the world's biodiversity. Only now science is catching up. And so I hope that more Indigenous leadership is valued in world leadership today. And I believe that as one of the best solutions to the climate crisis we are facing, we need leadership that is ahead of the game and who are not just scrambling after a disaster has already hit. We need forward thinkers and long-term thinkers if we can truly tackle this climate crisis and be prepared for it.
The climate crisis is already devastating lives. We need leaders who understand the urgency of this threat, who will work together to secure a safe and healthy future for all. It's time for bold, new thinking.
Here, and now, please welcome up on stage Elder Elbegdorj Sakia, former President and Prime Minister of Mongolia, and researcher and science communicator Kira Judge for a special ceremony to close out our event. Today we witness collaboration, clear, constructive communication, consensus, cohesion between the generations. We need more of this in the same spirit of collaboration, and to emphasize the urgency of what needs to be done. We have a special presentation now of an intergenerational statement, a global, inclusive collaboration between many different voices. President Elbegdorj, it's all yours.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, ladies and gentlemen. At the start, I would like to say that some say wisdom comes with age, but I am sure that the most of you were born wise. And this intergenerational statement was co-created by an inspiring group of scientists, educators, researchers, and policy experts from across the world, including Nigeria, Ireland, Brazil, the USA, and Kenya. Led by Julia Zasada, a young Polish writer, the process involved with one-on-one sessions, culminating in a powerful workshop where we came together to discuss actions for tackling the existential threats we all face. This collaboration shows that possible when generations work together. To face the great challenges of our time, whether climate, natural crisis, pandemics, nuclear weapons, or ungoverned artificial intelligence, we need leadership that spans generations. This process has shown us that combining the energy of youth with the experience of the elders offers a unique and powerful approach to solving these crises. By bringing together both young and experienced voices, we've created bold, sustainable solutions that reflect global sentiment. 77% of people believe leadership must be shared across generations. This collaboration is essential to tackling the problems we all share. Let this statement be the start of something bigger. We must continue working together to create a future that is sustainable, peaceful, and just. The decisions we make today will shape the world for generations to come. I invite each and every one of you to join us on this journey, united in purpose and action. Ladies and gentlemen, keep the smiles. Let's have long way of leadership, but not long faces.
We have just crossed over into afternoon, so in that spirit, good afternoon, everyone. I am an infectious disease epidemiologist at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, and also a We Are Family Foundation youth delegate, and I mainly worked on the pandemic section of our intergenerational statement. I think our planet is at a bit of a turning point at this moment, both in the context of these generational problems and existential threats that we've been discussing all morning, but if I may offer a little bit of hope, having worked as a science communicator since my teens, I have had the pleasure of witnessing a near institutional shift towards recognizing the power and importance of intergenerational collaboration. I think it's quite reminiscent of the trailblazing careers that elders have led today to see them start to step up and lead this change. And the core members of the core group and I got to witness this in action as we worked together on this statement. The quote, "The youth walk fast, but the elder knows the path," comes to mind as I reflect on this process. And indeed, the challenges that the world face are at a scale that we need all hands on deck. Frankly, we can't afford to continue shutting young people out of the rooms where decisions are made, not only because those decisions affect them, but also because young people have a lot of expertise to offer in their own right. We need the move fast, break things energy and the urgency and drive from young people, coupled with the hard-won wisdom that the elders have to navigate these global challenges. And I really hope that this intergenerational statement marks the beginning of this journey. This is a leaping off point to lead by example and turn words into actions. And the good news is that, as many of the panelists alluded to this morning, these issues are intersectional. So when we make progress on one, that propagates through to solutions for others, creating this positive ripple effect on a global scale. I think after the morning we've had discussing these generational problems, it might be easy to meet them with this sense of nihilism or hopelessness. And I think that sentiment can sometimes hang in the air when it comes to spaces like the UN General Assembly, particularly in the view of the general public. But I call to mind one of the findings from We Are Family Foundation's recent study on intergenerational collaboration, which is that youth possess a sense of hopeful urgency. And indeed, from this intergenerational statement, that 77% of people believe in the power of international collaboration. And I look around this room and I see it for what it is, a group of people who have come together because we care about what happens to our planet and the life that exists on it. So let's move forward from this moment, hopefully urgent and cautiously optimistic, armed with this belief that every step we take on this path in the right direction is worth taking, especially if we are walking together. So thank you to the elders for inviting us on this journey, and thank you to all of you for being here.
Thank you both so very much indeed. Please stay on stage. And now, please, all the elders who are here with us, please join us on stage. Mary, Ms. Jelani, President Santos, Helen, please join us up on stage, along with Emma, Flavia, and Amelia Dvorsky, all co-creators of this intergenerational statement. And you'll find the full statement on the Elders website, theelders.org. Mary would like to say some words in closing. Mary.
Thank you. I'm so excited by what we've been listening to. I want to add to the way in which the Elders' message about long-view leadership, that it demands co-creation with the intergenerational, with young people, co-creation with different generations. That's clearly a message that we've understood much better in looking at the various existential threats. I also want to emphasize that we have to have a very positive narrative, a narrative of hope. As Juan Manuel rightly said, we were mandated by Nelson Mandela to bring hope. It's absolutely vital. And there is a positive narrative to all of the existential threats. And the positive narrative on climate and nature is the one I'm most familiar with. And I loved the way it was described, the community activity. I think it's that link between communities demanding of their local leaders and their national leaders will change, will move much more rapidly. And the only other thing I would say is, I've noted how many women, especially young women, were on the panel. I really like that, because this is a time for women's leadership as well. So I'm going to ask somehow that we all, as we're being photographed, hold hands, because we're together on this, okay? Okay. We're together on this.
Yes, united, right? United, there is hope.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. There is hope. Thank you all for what you are doing, for working together to help save us humans from ourselves. May your advice, may your warnings be heeded, and may your experience and wisdom inspire current and future leaders to do the right thing. Thank you all.
And maybe,
and Mary, last word?
And maybe just to end with words of a former leader, former chair of the leaders, Kofi Annan. Very, very often he used this expression, which somehow feels right today. You are never too young to lead, and you are never too old to learn. You are never too young to lead, you are never too old to learn. I think that's why we need the co-creation. And you've added a great wisdom to the elders, to our long-view leadership. We will continue to message that as a very important part of it. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you so much, Mary. Many, many, many thanks to all our wonderful speakers and to you, our guests here and online. We hope you'll stay for coffee, connect, continue this vital conversation. May this help generate the collective responsibility and urgent action that's needed for the sake of us all. We thank you. Thank you so much.